Hey, what's up, all you art geeks out there? Today I wanted to talk a little bit about painting your portraits in stages. I think this is something everybody does in one form or another, and I have a particular way of doing it. It's just something I've slowly fine tuned over the years, and I wanted to talk a bit about that. Now, before we get into this, I just want to quickly mention that you can check out this full process. This is a 4-part painting demonstration over on my Patreon account. If you want to check that out, if you want to check out some tutorials, if you want to check out some art downloads, all of that can be found over on my Patreon account. Now, let's go ahead and get back to this discussion on painting in stages. Now, when I say painting in stages, I am specifically talking about painting a layer, letting it dry, doing another layer, and then building up layers until it's ready. Now, within each of those layers, though, I'm painting alla prima. I'm painting wet in a wet. I'm painting in one sitting these individual layers. So there's an isolated layer done in a couple hours for each layer of this painting. I'd say each layer is around 2 to 2.5 hours. The whole process took under 10. I think it's really close to about 9 hours total for this painting. And I demonstrated this over on Patreon to show my full process, to show how I do everything with all the bells and whistles. That was kind of the point of this demonstration. Now, the first layer for my paintings is always all about getting the composition locked in, getting the tonal qualities sort of locked in, or getting a general idea of where all the tones are going to be located. For this one, I was focusing on getting a black background and then having the midtones and the highlights all towards the middle. That's kind of the overall general composition of this painting, is having dark background and in the middle having all the different tones. So that's a simple way to look at it. But within that, there's a lot of things happening. And this first layer, I'm not worried too much about details. I'm just trying to block in the subject. I'm working on those big shapes first. So the big obvious shapes are the head, the overall head shape, how it takes up space within the composition, getting the background located, getting the hand generally located, but nothing too detailed. Just want to get a good idea of where everything's at. I always freehand everything. I find that the particular style I'm after really comes through when I freehand paint, when I make mistakes with certain shapes. That's always kind of a nice little added touch. It's something I usually fix or fine tune as I go. I fix those little misshapen areas, but I love having those little inconsistencies. I like having those areas where not everything's perfect. If I was to trace or use grids or guides, I could get things locked in more, but I like that human error that's built into my paintings and how I slowly try to fine tune it just based on looking at the reference image and looking back at what I've painted so far and just fixing that as I go. And that's the first 2 layers, really, in a nutshell, is getting everything with this fairly simple, I would say, grisaille style of color palette where it's warmer in the shadows and then gets cooler in a slightly green tint in the highlights and midtones, is a little bit more green. And after that's all locked in, after I get the hand, the nose, and the mouth all locked in, I kind of ignore the eyes. The eyes don't look great after the first 2 layers are done because I know that I'm going to paint over those anyway. So it's kind of just placeholder eyes. I'm not really worried about getting those perfect because I know I'm just going to paint right over them to tell the story I want to tell about this color that is sort of infecting the mind of this subject. So how could you as an artist apply this for your own paintings? Well, there's a lot of different advantages to doing this. The first one, I think, especially if you don't have a lot of time on your hands, you don't have a full day to paint, you could break it up into layers just based on the time you have. So if you know you only have an hour or 2 to paint every day, you could start to fine tune your process knowing that's all you have. So like this painting, for example, I'm only painting in 2-hour intervals. So if you had 2 hours every day, you could paint the overall block in on the first day, then you could fine tune the tones the next day, then you could start fine tuning all the details that you want to fine tune and break those into individual parts so that you can get it done efficiently, but you can also give yourself just the right amount of time that you'll have in your day. If you have a day job, if you're working till 5, then you can get home, have dinner, and then maybe paint from 7 to 9, and then be able to get a painting done about every week. Say it takes you about 4 layers to get a nice, accurate portrait painting. Maybe you don't want to have all the abstract elements like I have. Maybe you just want to create a straightforward portrait. You could start with just getting those initial block-ins done, getting the eyes, nose, mouth in the right place, and don't go any further than that. That's the key, is to not let yourself get too far ahead to where you might rush it and you might end up with things that have way too much detail that you find out the next day are just in the wrong spot. And then you have to redraw the whole thing, which can really bog down your process. So I'd say take an hour or 2, and see how accurate you can get those general shapes into place. And then after that's dry, you can go on to the second stage and see where you maybe have made some mistakes. Maybe you'll see it with a fresh pair of eyes and see, oh, I need to move the eyes, the nose, mouth a little bit here or there just to get it just right. But after you do that, you can do this all in the same day. You can start to add some detail to those eyes. Maybe you just work on one eye a day. Maybe you only have 45 minutes. Work on one eye for 45 minutes, then let it dry, go on to the next eye, then work on the nose. You could break it into chunks no matter what kind of time frame you have, but just knowing that ahead of time that you have a certain amount of time. And I feel like you actually do get more done when you break it down this way, because a lot of the time for me especially, I will get maybe 3 to 4 hours into a painting and I feel like I'm just staring at it, not getting anything done. I'm making all these decisions where my eyes are starting to kind of lose their focus. They're not seeing things as clearly, and it's so much better to just stop where you're at, especially when you start feeling like you're not getting anything done, like you're just looking at it, trying to find things to work on. That's a good place to stop. Let it dry, and then when you come back the next day, you'll see all kinds of things that you can work on. That's a really good, efficient way to go. It makes it great for no matter what your schedule is. If you have kids, if you have to take them to soccer practice, if you can only find a half hour, you can find a way to work in half-hour increments and get things done. And that way you don't feel like you're stressing yourself out. You can work for a half hour or an hour, stop, and then let it dry, see it with fresh eyes the next day, and go on from there. Another nice advantage to working in stages is having that drawing time. When you have a drawing time, I think that can really help, especially if you tend to paint in really thick passages. If you end up painting with a lot of thick paint, it's really hard to paint wet into wet after a certain point. Now, I do paint alla prima. I'll paint a whole painting in one shot and call it done. But it is nice once you feel like you've just painted so much paint into one area and you're just not able to shift the colors or the tones that much. That's a perfect place to stop, let it dry, and then you can wait a couple days, go over it again after the paint's dry, and then you can start fine tuning. Usually it takes 3 to 4 days if you have the right kind of colors set up with your oil paints, but you can work on other paintings while it's drying. You can start one every day and then just rotate through 5 to 6 paintings every week, and that way you can get those 5 to 6 paintings done pretty efficiently. There's always one good sign that will tell you should stop, and that's when your colors start to dull. If you're using more vibrant colors and by the time you get to the end of the day your colors seem a little bit more flat, that's because you've painted wet into wet for so long, those colors will die down. So sometimes it is actually beneficial to have your colors be a little bit more saturated, knowing that you're going to paint for a long extended period of time. But if you stop sooner, those colors will stay more vibrant, and then you can just paint right on top of that with a new palette of colors. You can start building those colors up, and that's another great thing, is just being able to build color. Now, speaking of color, I am finally starting to add some color to the top part of this face. This is where I start to slowly transition onto that third layer. After getting the hand, the nose, the mouth is all locked in, this is where I get to have some fun. I always kind of consider this my therapy session, where I get to finally let loose, let some big brush strokes happen again. And what I'm trying to do here is to work into those more intense layers of color. I don't want to just jump right into the very strong colors. Of course, you could do that. It all depends on who's painting and how you want to paint, but I just prefer to slowly build up the colors. So I'll start with some purples and some blues that are a little bit more increased in saturation, but there's a ways to go. This is just that first layer of color. This is where it's kind of like a transition color. I wouldn't say this is really the full last color I'm going to have, but it's a transition between those subtle earthy colors I had in the first couple layers, those browns and greens, and now I'm starting to get into some more vibrant color. And the reason I like to do this, the reason I like to build color up and to have a slow gradual build between the subtle colors and the more intense colors is it's just a little bit more pleasing to the eye, I feel. I don't like having really strong color shifts happen right up against each other. I like there to be some sort of gradation between the earthy colors and the strong colors. Now, there are times when I break that rule where I do have some really strong colors right up against a subtle color, and there's times when I may have two completely opposing primary colors or secondary colors that are on different sides of the color wheel right up against each other, but that is very difficult to pull off and make visually appealing, in my opinion. There's just a lot of ways you can transition color to make it look visually appealing, and there's a lot of ways to make that happen in not so successful of a way. So just look out for that. Look out for how your colors are transitioning from subtle colors to intense colors, or from one intense color to a very different intense color. There's a lot of things to think about when doing this. So the way I'm doing this now, though, this is one of those surefire fire approaches I like to use, where I go from earthier colors and just build and build and build to stronger colors and put those stronger colors in a more specific area. Now, that's just some general thoughts I have about why painting in stages is useful. That's why I decided to use this painting in particular, because this one was broken down into 4 parts for my patrons to check out over on my Patreon account. I find that this 2-hour approach, having a 2-hour stage or having a 2-hour stage-by-stage approach, really helps to keep you efficient, so you're not just staring at your painting wondering what I should do next. It gives you a chance to let it dry, work on the next layer, know what your approach is going to be for that next layer. So let me know what you think. Let me know what your thoughts are on doing paintings in stages, doing it in layers, and having an approach that works from painting to painting. Feel free to leave me some comments, like, subscribe to my channel. That'd be awesome. Thank you so much, all you art geeks, for checking out another video. I will talk to you again very soon. Bye.